I'm going to talk about something that is work that we don't quite understand very well. I thought sort of giving it as a title for this conference was going to force me to sit down and think through it, but some kinds of arm twisting don't always work. So I'm going to tell you about some intriguing results. We don't, we're in the process of trying to make sense of it. This has to do with the plastic deformation events in shear amorphous solids. This topic has been already introduced. Basically, if one looks at a glass that has been formed in some fashion, application of external stress leads to plasticity and mechanical failure. The plastic events that lead eventually to mechanical failure is what we are interested in, but a lot of the interest is what happens before you reach that point of yielding. The distribution of strain intervals between successive events is one thing that we focus on. And also, as a related thing, the size dependence of these mean intervals. What do they tell us about the nature of plastic rearrangements? En route to failure is what we would eventually like to be able to say something about. Okay, I think I skipped the title slide here. So just to acknowledge my co-workers. So the current ongoing work is done with Prem Kumar Laishanktham and Anshul Parmar. Earlier work on this is now results concerning model three-dimensional glasses. Earlier work on two-dimensional glasses was done in collaboration with Idhima Prakacha, Prabhat Jaiswal, and George Henschel. Okay, so just to set up terminology, this is, so what we're going to be looking at through computer simulations of model glass formers under what is called athermal quasi-static shear is as we apply, like I said, at zero temperature mechanical stress, at some point the system is going to sort of reach some point of instability and make a discontinuous change in structure. And these are what I will be referring to as plastic events. We are sort of interested in looking at the statistics of how long it takes before the next event happens. Okay. So athermal quasi-static simply means that I'm always going to be sitting at a local energy minimum, and any structural change happens only when the particular local minimum that I'm sitting in becomes unstable. Okay? And the model glass former that we'll be studying in 3 dimensions is what Pinaki mentioned in his talk a little while ago. I won't say too much more, but this is just to give you an idea of what one is looking at. So the function of the application of strain, which is what we do. We have the stress in the system increasing in linear branches, which are sort of linear elastic branches, which are interrupted by these discontinuous changes. Okay, so these are the plastic events, and the corresponding energy looks like so. Okay, so okay, so what the size and the structure of these plastic drops can be looked at in various ways. I won't sort of spend any time talking about the spatial structure of these, though it has been a point of considerable interest for us. So here we basically look at just the gaps between, or the distances between successive plastic drops. Okay. Again, a stress-strain curve, and here just to sort of set the discussion going in a relatively simple case, if one were to look at the steady state regime beyond the yielding point of a material, basically here the stress is not increasing any longer, even on average, with further increases in strain. And so here you can say that whatever increase in the energy or the stress, whatever increase in the energy of the system results from the application of stress and increase in strain is compensated by the energy of the drops. Okay, so whenever there is one of these plastic events, there's also a corresponding drop in energy, and you basically write down a balance equation between the interval between successive events and the energy drops, and these two have to balance. And if you sort of look at what that tells you, in particular, assuming that there is some kind of a system size dependence to these strain intervals and the energy drops, you find a simple relation between the exponents that characterize the strain intervals and the energy drops, okay? And these relations are indeed observed in simulations, and they seem to have the same fairly nice looking values in 2 and 3 dimensions. Whether they're universal and how one can obtain these numbers is something that is a point of study. But this behavior is different from what happens if I were to take a fresh glass sample that has been cooled down into a solid state, and I apply external stress. That's sort of the initial drop plastic rearrangement that happens in the system must depend on the history of the glass and on the behavior of a material that's isotropic in every way. The second regime that is of interest is once the system has begun to deform plastically, but before I reach the yield point, there is a second regime, and one can ask what happens in that regime. Okay. This is, again, for the 3-dimensional system that we've most recently been looking at, the behavior of the system. And what I show here is the strain intervals as a function of the system size for the first plastic events, okay? And correspondingly, so this is the bottom 2 curves are for different glasses that are prepared differently. And the point to note is that the exponents that describe the size dependence is not the same in the 2 cases, and there's no reason to expect that there is some universal number, and you don't find it. On the other hand, if one looks at the statistics of energy drops, one doesn't find any significant or systematic size dependence, and again, one doesn't expect it. Okay, because only in the steady state do we have some reason to expect a relationship between the exponent that characterizes the energy drops and the strain intervals. Okay. Now, let me, okay, so I'll skip through most of this, but this initial distribution has been analyzed by looking at, the initial size dependences for the first drops has been analyzed looking at Weibull distributions that may describe it. I think I'm running a little low on time, so let me go on. So in the regime where I find this kind of a distribution, the exponent eta that describes the small delta gamma distribution is related to the size dependence in this fashion, but we don't know whether that relationship should also hold in other cases, okay? And but the question that we can ask is what happens in between the first event and the steady state? And then here there's something interesting. So when I look at this exponent which comes from the system size dependence, what I find is a very surprising, at least to me, non-monotonic dependence of this exponent that describes the size dependence of the mean interval between plastic rearrangements. And this also seems to correspond to the observation that the small value part of the distribution of these intervals is becoming flat. That is, this exponent eta is 0. Okay, whether it's strictly 0 and how close does it need to be 0, how much this relationship between eta and this combination here needs to be valid is something that needs further discussion. There's some sort of, there has been some analysis theoretically of what one should expect. And so in this work here, the sort of proposal that was made is that the behavior that one sees from the numerical simulations is actually sort of some approximation of an idealized picture where as soon as you begin to strain a glass, there is a discontinuous change in the statistics of the distances to instability. And there's sort of 3 distinct regimes where you have the initial sort of virgin samples, and then you have the strain samples before the yield, and then you have the behavior beyond the yield. Okay, and okay, so this is, I think, I will not go through this. Just a sketch of how that expectation is developed. But quickly, I show you data coming from 3-dimensional systems, which basically are consistent with what we see in 2D. And again, this exponent beta and correspondingly this combination shows non-monotonic behavior. It shows system size dependence, and so basically that's sort of where we are. The question is, with all of this, the size dependence of mean strain intervals between plastic rearrangements exhibits interesting non-monotonic behavior. The numerical evidence and arguments suggesting finite probability of zero barrier directions. Okay, that's right. In the sheared state, but before the yielding point. Whether that's true, what is the meaning of this in terms of how one thinks of the state of a glass that is subjected to external stress but which hasn't yielded yet, and how that may tell us something about the yield event as a phenomenon. Or questions of interest. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Srikanth. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
So, no, it's actually, at least I don't understand where those exponents come from, which in the steady state, which are also the same for 2 and 3 dimensions, which, but that's something that's interesting to have. I mean, there's some, something of a numerical model where Smarajit and Itamar and Iran Lerner sort of, they defined a scheme by which you could get something like this, but not quite yet, I guess, a calculation or a yield.
Any other question? Yeah.
I think maybe I already mentioned, but what was the definition of slow quench?
Slow quench, okay, so I basically, if you have a glass that is well annealed, a slow quench is that you cool it very slowly. So it's not a quench actually, it's annealed.
Temperature is changing as a function of time?
Yeah, I mean, if you do it that way, that's not how we did it, but it was an easy description to give. So a slow quench is basically what is labeled as a slow quench are glasses where the system has been annealed at a low temperature, equilibrated at a low temperature. Yeah.
No, I mean, when we have a rapid quench, we just go from a high temperature to a low temperature.
Correct.
But now, change the temperature as a function of time. Is that what you mean by slow quench?
That's what slow quench means.
So that's
but I just used this as a label to say something that's a little bit more complicated, which is what I'm calling slow quench or local energy minimum structures were obtained from a liquid that was equilibrated at a low temperature. Okay? It amounts to the same thing, but it needs a little bit of
procedure that you used is different, yeah. Okay, so yeah, thank Srikanth again. And